we've now finally come to the last session. It was a short 2 half days, right? We only had 2 half days. It was short, but I think we all got a lot out of it. The speakers were brilliant, excellent, and they always mention me. I don't know why. I was, what I talked about the future wasn't meant to be intimidating. I was just saying that things are happening. We should be aware of it. But to be honest, I came in 7 years ago as the chairman of the ADC with a very clear vision. And I was very clear what I was going to do as a funding body, what should be this discipline and everything. 7 years on, I become very confused. Because as you listen more and more to the stakeholders, every one of them have very good reasons. And they are defending their own stand with very righteous values. And so I guess what I learned was you have to be open-minded. In this world of the arts, you have to be open-minded. And you have to be prepared to move on with time. What proved a success formula in the past is not going to hold true forever. So we have to balance between continuing with the traditional heritage, the arts, the classical music, but at the same time, as many of you said, we have to take risk. We have to leap into the future. So hopefully, with this last session, we have 4 very distinguished speakers who is relevant to Hong Kong. And hopefully after what they have learned in the last 3 sessions, they will be able to relate how they see this, being applied to Hong Kong. What are the problems? What are the way that things should be moving? Now, I would like to conduct this session more in an open manner. So after 5 minutes, for each of you, we'll throw the floor open because this is the last session. I'm sure many of the participants have questions or viewpoints they would like to express, and I would like to encourage all our overseas speakers to also come in and challenge them. Because, whatever they say may not be right, may not be the way you see things, so challenge them. Because I think that would bring us to a better, idea of what's happening or what should be happening. So let me introduce the 4 speakers. Tim CALNIN, to my left. He has held senior positions with leading musical and artistic organizations in Australia, Europe, and Asia. Earlier, he was the chief executive of the Hong Kong Philharmonic Orchestra for 6 years. And now he's the director of performing arts. He was the director of performing arts at the Sydney Opera House before he was appointed as director of Kwun. This is the Center for Heritage and Arts, and it's a new project of the Jockey Club, which will open sometime. Because it says 2017. Then we have Doryun Chong. Also, he's going to face the same issue. Doryun is a deputy director and chief curator of M+, a new museum of visual culture, which will open sometime in the near future in the West Kowloon Cultural District in Hong Kong. And Doryun is an old friend. He worked together with ADC in curating Hong Kong's participation in the Venice Biennale in 2015 and 17, and hopefully in 2019 as well. Then we have Connie Lam, homegrown arts administrator, executive director of the Hong Kong Arts Center since 2009. And Connie has rich curatorial experience in various arts forms. And then we have Tang Shu-wing. Shu-wing was the former dean of the School of Drama of the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts. He's currently artistic director of his own theater studio, and his works are revered on the international stage, including the Shakespeare's Globe in London. So a very strong panel. So may I now hand over the mic to Tim?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the Arts Development Council for organising this great conference and bringing together so many interesting people from around the world and locally. It's a fantastic thing. I think it's very stimulating for the environment here in Hong Kong, and so thank you to Winsome and your team for organising it so beautifully. It's sort of quite difficult to be a respondent in this situation because the topics that have been covered in the last day and a half have been so diverse, but there are a few themes that came through quite consistently that I thought might be interesting to return to. And one was this concept of excellence, which is something that is very hard to define. And I think funding organisations and arts organisations always are challenged by coming up with meaningful ways to be able to measure their success artistically and creatively. And I hope Rupert will forgive me if I make reference to the Australia Council, because the Australia Council has grappled with this for a very long period of time. They took a very interesting decision about 15 years ago, I think it was, which was to ask the arts companies themselves to work out how they would define their success and how they would measure their quality. And it was sort of issued as a challenge. And it enabled each organisation to think about meaningful ways of being able to critique itself. And it's a difficult thing because you want to get a big range of opinions and try and synthesise something. And I think at the heart of it was a commitment to, I think what the Australia Council was trying to do, more than just be able to answer to its government masters in Canberra, I think more importantly it was trying to come up with something that would allow organisations to evolve and develop. So have objective measures which allow you to work out actually what you're doing well, but also what you're not doing so well and what you might do to address that in the future. I mean, of course, once that process got in the hands of the arts bureaucrats, it turned into this hilarious thing that's called the Artistic Self-Reflection Tool, which sounds almost rude. But I think it was a very interesting process because I think ultimately organisations were consulting a very wide range of opinions and views and trying to work out interesting ways to describe their achievements. And I think it also developed a certain level of humility about, what you were doing well, but also what you weren't doing so well and what you might be able to work on in the future. And I think that's where it became quite instructive. So if I could give you the example, at the time I was the Director of Artistic Planning at the Sydney Symphony, and we were sort of contributing to this process by devising our own way of measuring success. And I used to consult an artistic committee from within the orchestra, so that was made up of about 8 or 10 musicians. We also would invite a panel of external people from the arts generally who we would invite to performances throughout the year. And we would also consult with guest artists who were visiting, who came regularly. You'd often have conductors who would come every couple of years. And so you would, over a period of, say, 5 years, you would be asking people whether there are strengths or weaknesses within the ensemble that you could develop. And this turned out to be an extremely worthwhile thing for a performing arts ensemble, which is always in the process of evolving and developing, where you were getting some really good objective review of your activities, and you were able to then build on that. We work out, well, actually, we don't play music of the 18th century that well. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to concentrate on that for the next couple of years in a particular way, work with experts in that field, bring in guest conductors or guest soloists who have a specialization in that field, and see whether we can actually develop and improve. And they were actually extremely constructive things in the pursuit of excellence. So I think it's something that is, in a way, the successful assessment of artistic quality is something quite organic. And if organisations really commit to examining their performance, because you tend to want to talk it up and report as if you're doing an annual report which celebrates everything. But if you're quite humble about it, you can produce something that then allows you to focus in areas where perhaps you're not so strong and do something about it. My time's up.
Very good. Doryun.
Thank you, Wilfred, and the ADC team. I want to echo what Tim just said for inviting me and us, but also inviting these fantastic speakers. It's been really stimulating to hear from colleagues their practices and the philosophies and principles behind what they do, how they do it. And it's been especially useful working on this long-term project of institution building here in Hong Kong. To answer, yes, the museum will open in near future. Near future is a elastic term, but we like to say more critically that the museum has been operating and functioning for the last 6-7 years. As you made reference, that we've worked together, I myself twice, but 3 times Hong Kong participations in the Venice Biennale, and those 3 exhibitions are just part of now about 20 exhibitions that we have organized over the last 6 years or so, including the current one that I know that speakers are going to go and see in a few hours. Building the collection for the same amount of time, and of course building the team capacity, awareness in general. This has been going on, so we're certainly an institution we would like to think are very much doing our purpose, one of the purposes of serving the public first and foremost here in Hong Kong. So to make a relationship between what I'm doing, because I know that I'm not here just to talk about my institution, but make some relationship between that and the conversations that have been going on since yesterday, going kind of backward order. Boundaries is something that I think about a lot, especially in relation to disciplinary boundaries, because we are, M+ is a museum of 20th and 21st century visual culture, and that's defined mainly through 3 disciplinary pillars of design and architecture, moving image, and visual art. We often talk about how these 3 disciplinary pillars are distinct on their own, but contains many diversity and multi-layers, many mediums and materialities, but also we explore the intersections and overlaps between these disciplinary pillars. So there was a lot of talk about cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. I mean, these are terms that all institutions are grappling with, even if you're not calling yourself as a museum of visual culture, but even if you're just a contemporary art museum, because just to take one discipline or one medium of contemporary art, that itself has expanded and diversified itself in such great ways that there's no serious museum in the world that thinks that, oh, we are only interested in paintings and sculpture. And as a new institution, and so much of our job is just setting up the new infrastructure. It's great theoretically, sometimes also in practice, to talk about breaking down the boundaries and willfully and intentionally undermining these existing structures. But when you're in the stage and business of setting it up, then there's also great power and necessity of thinking about the boundaries and the specificities contained within those boundaries before you start talking about revising and restructuring. Well, in fact, those two things happen simultaneously. Thinking also a lot about application of digital technologies. Obviously, as a 21st century museum, you cannot not do that. And I don't think it's even a matter of great debate as to whether to do it or not. Only 1 minute left already, okay. But also I think it comes with many challenges, and this isn't something that we have talked about greatly, but with other colleagues of contemporary museums around the world, there is brewing discussion about the sort of violence even and uncontrollability of opinions in the social media space and how that can really affect the work that we do on site. And I don't think we have really figured out how to handle this. So this audience, now I'm moving to the first topic of audience. This is not just the audience that's coming through your doors to your physical venue, but also the audience that all institutions have been working the last few years to reach out to, which is in the digital space, cyberspace. Perhaps under the naive understanding that this expansion is just expansion of our democratic ideal, but in fact, I think the behaviors and attitudes and developing culture in this social media space is perhaps not something that we don't quite know what it is yet. So that kind of great challenge is something that is facing us, and that will also affect our face-to-face audience as well. So all of these topics that came up yesterday and today have provided a lot of food for thought. So thank you.
Okay, Connie.
I really want to thank ADC because it's like because you provide a chance that I've been away from my work, and I think it's most of the art administrators in Hong Kong will share with me is like I don't know why we are so busy. We have to work so hard. Okay, maybe it's to get some funding. This is one thing. Yeah, I've been like for this 2.5 days is like I take a lot of things, but I only have 5 minutes, so I can only pick a few points so I can share. As first things I want to share is about the importance of cross-festival collaboration. I hope next time that ADC will invite the tourism board to join the talk, because I think it's really important is like if we think Hong Kong is a cultural city, we need more promotion. And I also learned from Shasha's what you've been sharing, because it's the collaborative between different festivals. Actually, Hong Kong have a lot of festivals and mega events, and also a lot of very interesting things is if we can coordinate and to promote, and we can like really help each other to develop audience, because audience needs different types of programs. So this is one thing I think I share, and I've been very interested. The other thing is like is the importance of upscaling the audience. I really share with Lynn what you shared yesterday. That is like we need cultivate audience, but not only they just enjoying, but they need to participate. So they have more nutrition on that. And I think if what we're doing, we need to have critical mass audience, but in the meantime, we have to have more like connoisseurs audience, so they can critique and then we can improve. I think this is really important. And also I think in of course we should have like audience like we are audience basis. What we want to reach out is young people and also like the young olds. But I think the comings we should convert most of the all the government officials as and also our funders as art lovers. So with all this conversion, that I think Hong Kong can have more power, resources to have a better program internationally, because every time our government officials, they become our ambassadors to promote Hong Kong arts. And the other thing is about the technologies for arts infrastructures. And yes, we are living in the 21st century, and we have AI, VR, we have everything. But I think technologies is not only for the futures, but it's also can embrace the past. I think it's like archive is really important. We really need to make use of technologies for better archival. Like I always like to, when people interview me, it's about Hong Kong arts. And then I always using 1995, the development of ADC, the open of ADC as a very important point, because a lot of young art organizations is give birth. And like, though we have the Asia Art Archive, but they cannot like collect all the histories of what's been happening. And also like in the past, Art Center is very important for the Black Box Theatre to raise up a lot of young, small theatre groups. We have a lot of videos, but we don't have budgets for digitalizations. These are the parts of the histories of Hong Kong. And I think this is really important is for the technologies. We also have to pay attention on the, for the archival. And because this is part of Hong Kong art history, and then we should be very proud of that. And the last, I just want to get a quote, because this is really the great quote from Simone is like, funders are not to support excellence, but the quest for excellence. And I think that this is something I really encourage, and I'm looking forward to the funders in Hong Kong also embrace about that. This is my taking points. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Well said, huh? Maybe the applause is for the lady, right? Shu-wing.
Thank you, Wilfred, for inviting me here. And if I'm over 5 minutes, please stop me, because I have written an A4 paper. I'd just like to share some of my observations from my personal experience of dealing with a number of institutions and fellow artists and audience. Not necessarily criticism. In the previous sections, arts and cultures are defined or redefined by languages that policymakers, arts administrators, and funders use. And so the arts and cultures should be like this or like that. And above all, they have values only if they become part of a social and economic policy. Words like arts for change, empowerment, personal growth, diversity, and behind all this, there's only one fundamental concept. Arts and culture must be positive. Positive from the point of view of the government and funders, or in substance, that of the majority view, or the values it represents. Some words constantly come up: strategy, collaboration, sustainability, engagement, education, creativity. And we should do everything that attains a positive value. So that hardware, infrastructures are thus built to realize these policies. But art is about feeling and expression. Creating a unique artistic vocabulary to express that feeling. Expression does not involve good or bad, right or wrong. It's only a matter whether it's strong enough to express that real feeling. And audience are there to experience and stretch their own imagination, which has no form. Artists are special kind of professionals who make a living on depicting the true nature of human beings through artificial means. Whereas in daily lives, we play artificial games in a very serious manner. No matter how hard we set up rules and regulations, we cannot stop tragedies and calamities happening every day in real life. Creation is without sky, trying to get hold of certain fundamental values like authenticity, beauty, But the operational side of a creative work often involves values opposite to the original ones. Because once buying and selling occur, the entire purpose of creativity will be shifted largely to economic rewards and social status. Hardware infrastructures are constantly built. But as an arts practitioner, I found that the software is often operating not smoothly, if not totally against the hardwares. Because very often, the artistic content is not the major concern. But its documentation on all levels is. Because they are proofs of the realization of a successful event, justifying the input of resources so that everybody is happy. But this is a reality that we cannot change for the time being. We can only work around it to make it better. So let's go back to basics. What is the most important thing we need in life, particularly in arts and culture? I cannot give you an answer. I just invite you to think about certain things. And personally, I don't think that art can solve every problem. And don't think that we could do everything. Don't think that new is automatically better. And don't think that knowledge automatically induces a better life. Every move in a policy is adjusting the benefits of various sectors. New things create new interested parties and new game players, which are automatically challenging the old ones. And don't overemphasize the fact that art equals life, and every citizen can be an artist in its absolute term. We artists are strange human beings. Sorry to say that, but it's true. Especially good artists. We are hypersensitive, passionate, sometimes too passionate. We are very easy to formulate likes and dislikes. We lie to others in a very smart way because the truth is often very painful. We don't need to talk if good artists meet. We just have a coffee, have a few words, and we know approximately 50% how they are working without seeing their work. We are egoists, very often retreat to solitude. We are constantly shifting between order and chaos, between having forms and no forms. We are also very vulnerable because we are often the first to be executed by a totalitarian government and also the first to receive budget cuts in democratic societies. Not many parents are happy to see their children are situated in such a position. But life is full of contradictions. Life is above all a spiritual training. Good artists have strong minds and strong bodies to endure the hardship. So for young people, if you have this aspiration, don't hesitate because you live only once. But you better prepare yourself to a tough life. To many, technology can solve many problems in daily life, that's true. But more subtly, it induces a bigger economic return and a higher social status. And the overall publicity in the society is that if any individual can succeed if we can master technology to our service. And here lies the notion of fear of being left behind in national and international competition. If you stop, that means you are going backwards. But in many cases, it's not true. You stop, you see things more clearly. And if in some occasions things are like there for thousands of years, and just let them stay like that. Do not introduce technology to alter them. This will create a breaking stratum in our human tradition. In the 50s and 60s, people have fewer means, but happier family values. We are happier because we have much fewer monster parents like today. The question is technology, whether it is an end or a means. If it is an end, why this end? If it is a means, what is the end? And about boundaries, I would often cite the case of Jason Conswick of Richard Wagner about the total works of art. He believes that every art form can be combined together under the notion of drama, and that is opera. And that induces the highest aesthetic experience. But to me, it is a personal feeling of the object that we are going to enjoy or consume. I don't think that the aesthetic value of the cello suite of Bach is less than the aesthetic value of the Wing cycles of Richard Wagner. It's just different. And about boundary, anti-boundary, or no matter language that you invent to describe them, one thing that as a practicing artist I really advocate is young artists should learn their skills firmly in their discipline before you're talking about course discipline. We often find young artists having a lot of smart ideas but poor techniques. And throughout their life, they would work around that smart mentality. And that's the end of their career. Thanks.
Very good. Very good and very heavy, right? And that's Shu-wing. We all know him. Now, very, very, very interesting dialogue is happening. You know, each of our speakers have spoken on different themes. I don't want to confine to any one of them. Please, you know, the floor, the overseas speakers, this is your last chance before you go home and to really give us more inspiration. Please, anyone. Yes, Andy.
Well, I'd like to kick off. I think that last speech was absolutely fantastic. It was a very good finale to the day to an extent. I would like to just ask the panel, picking up on that point about it's only about positives, how can we allow a safe space for failure? Because you need to have failure before you can have success. So I agree, it's not all about positives. Where's the safe space for failure?
Anyone? Tim?
It's a great question, actually, and because when you're, you know, in organisations that are so sort of results focused, you have to make space for process, for experimentation, and I suppose institutions that have a broad enough platform are able to nurture more experimental or developing pieces or artists in perhaps a less exposed way, not on the main stage, but in the right kind of environment. And that's, I think, that's where, I mean, just hearing Shu-wing talk reminded me, and I think it probably reminded everybody in the room, why we work in this business, because we are so stimulated by the proximity to a fresh and unconventional way of looking at things and challenging what is normally accepted as the everyday. And I think when it comes to finding that space where it's permissible to fail, where you don't have to be 100% successful at every turn, you have to be listening to what the artists want. I mean, I think that one of the dangers that we all encounter when we're working in larger institutions is that we become increasingly distant from the artists themselves, and we have to constantly go back and listen to the artists rather than assuming we know already what the artists want and need and expect. So I think that's actually something that we have to really take very much to heart and ensure that just like this panel today and yesterday's panel, having practicing artists on every panel is a really vitally important part of this kind of conference, and constantly reminds us of our responsibility to ensure that we're listening primarily to those creative voices.
Shu-wing, you have an answer?
I have been already over 5 minutes, right?
You can have my 5 minutes.
Well, I think, yes, a space is a space of cherishing a quest for failure. And very often, failure is the mother of success. And that is very important. And it trains our minds, it trains our techniques so that we become better. But it's also very painful and difficult. And so we often say that there are great international masters that we should invite them to Hong Kong to teach here and there. That's fantastic. But we should also train our own international masters, because if you just look to the outside, this is good sometimes, but sometimes we should look back to the inside. What do we have, and what we are lacking, and why we are lacking this? And I think we cannot solve this problem just with the work of artists. There must be collective effort. And then, but Hong Kong is a very special place. There's something that we can do without any burden, but there's something that we cannot do. Everybody knows. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I know what that is. Anyway, Wilek.
I'm Wai Luk Lo from Hong Kong Arts Development Council. I want to answer Future Everything's question. Yeah, I remember the first production, the pioneer production of The Seagull is a big flop. Okay, so it is only the vision of Stanislavski that eventually not only make Seagull a master, a modern master work, but make Chekhov a master of not only modern drama, but drama. So the vision of arts presenter and artist are very important. So I agree, we need to support the quest for excellence. We are not only supporting the already proven good work. We need to support budding artists. We need to support good vision, although that vision is not well equipped yet, but we need to give them resources. Thank you.
Okay, anyone from the floor? Oh, Connie?
When we talk about failure, is what we have to define what is failure. So being working in art centers, we always doing something very niche. So very niche, this means that it's not everybody will understand. So if you put a KPI about the numbers of audience, it's always failures. Just like a few years ago, we started to work with Samson Young of the Sonic Anchor. Is really a sound arts project. So first, how many people you want to expect to come? How are we going to promote, get across? Is like most of the artists will not be known to a lot of audience. So first of all, is like when we start to do some new projects, is like our KPI is not about that. The KPI is about the learning process and also how to grow. And last thing is sustainability. So failure we have to embrace, but the most important thing is the sustainability. So after like a few years now, is like Sonic Anchor is known to a numbers of people, and now I have the opportunities to share with you. We have Sonic Anchors. Come to visit us next time when we promote to you. Okay.
Okay, Doryun.
So there are a couple of things that popped into my head in relation to that question. The first thing is what I think is a really brilliant description of an institution that I used to work for, where the director at the time said that she wanted her museum to be a safe place for unsafe ideas. And I, of course, understood, and all of us understood, unsafe doesn't mean something political or ideological, but speculations, imagining different possibilities, and not necessarily accepting the ideas that are already established or widely accepted. So I guess that's sort of the kind of ethos that I think a lot of contemporary institutions or festivals or organizations already work with. The second thing that popped into my head was one art critic who said that if you have as a contemporary artist, if you have 10% success rate, then you're very successful already. So I think all of us working with living art forms, with living artists, know that what we're not looking for is always success, whatever that means all the time, that it is really very much part of the process. And I think it is that if 90% is failures or it's not quite success, and I think that's the great rich space where professional criticism happens. That's where all our audiences and critiques also happen. I don't think any of us expect that everybody comes and all of them will love everything that we present. I think what makes what we do really vibrant is that there is a whole range of opinions about what we present, and then that's what makes discourse happen, and then that's what is actually the engine and motor of what we do.
Thank you. Yes, Wilfred.
Thank you. A really, really great discussion. A lot is expected of funding agencies, arts funding agencies. Even in the last 24 hours, we've talked about diversity, inclusiveness, traditional and experimental arts, large and small companies, geographic diversity, young and old participation, indigeneity, boundaries, technology, audiences, education, and I probably left a whole lot else as well. There's a saying in other sectors that if you stand for everything, you stand for nothing. So my question to the panelists is that if funding agencies really want to stand for something now, what can they afford to not focus on?
Any ideas? From here or from the floor? Anyone?
I feel your pain, Rupert.
Yes, Kath.
That's a very good question, and it resounds very well with us because we have the same issues and we have been debating this. And I agree, for an organisation like ours, which is operating in a very small country, only 4.5 million people, that's like Melbourne, but everyone expects us to have world-class this and world-class that. And in many cases we do, but in other cases we don't. I mean, how many opera companies, how many orchestras can you afford in a situation like that? Some people don't like to have that conversation. So what can we focus on that is different? And for us, it's very much our Indigenous culture, our expanding diversity, and we have made that decision that we are going to focus both on high quality but also diversity. And that will mean that we cannot invest in some things, and you have to be courageous about that. But in my experience, if you tell people what you're focusing on, if you say that's what you want to do, most of them will get on board with it somehow. It's if you don't tell them and you pretend that you're trying to do everything for everybody that people get cross.
Yes, Tisa.
Thanks, Wilfred. Can I just, into this conversation, tease out a couple of strands that have been there, which were to do with excellence and quality. And while I agree completely about the need for failure, the need for space for failure, and not and we're not dealing with products, so its process is important. I very much appreciate what Simone said earlier about having different definitions of the KPIs for different types of organizations. And what I wanted to say is just this. Well, two things. One, I agree with Shu-wing about looking at growing masters, right? And in this context, therefore, then also not to penalize success, but to build successes. So it's great to have space for experimentation, great to have new things, great to break the boundaries, but where there's work that sits within disciplines that they were there for, the back suites will remain important. Playing them well is really important. So I want to just say a word to keep that balance so that as we are very involved in the new and the next and what comes, what's chasing us and what we have to respond to, I think one of the values of the arts are some universal human values expressed in great works that we should continue to treasure.
Thank you. Well said.
I've just been thinking about Rupert's challenge to us, and it made me think again about the research that you mentioned yesterday at the beginning of your presentation, that the Australia Council produces every year, which is a sort of it's a view of how the arts are going. It's a kind of annual health check of the arts in Australia and how they're evolving, how they're developing, and also I think through that research, because it's quite profound research, and it's linked, I think, with every 7 years it's linked with the census, where you get a really deep, broad national perspective, but it brings up issues and trends and developments, and also highlights some areas of weakness. And that enables the arts funding bodies to consider where to be placing the emphasis, what sectors need support. Perhaps there are some corners of the arts which are gradually disappearing, and maybe that's a natural part of the process. They're really difficult things to actually grapple with, but I'm sure that the depth and quality of that research is something that really does profoundly inform the decisions that the Australia Council makes about where to place its funding dollars. And the reason why I wanted to just draw that point out was it's one of my favourite subjects, where when Winsome and I have had an initial chat about this, but there's clearly a great need for Hong Kong's arts scene to have that kind of research and analysis available to be able to really inform where best to place the financial and resources emphasis in order to achieve something. I mean, at this stage, we can't say that 98% of people living in Hong Kong regard the arts as an important part of their lives and makes a worthwhile contribution. I think we'd all love to be able to know what that number is. And actually, if it's less than 100%, let's use that as a challenge to develop over the next few years so that we can increase that level of recognition, participation, and appreciation. That to me is a very important thing that needs to happen to be able to inform some quite long-term strategic decisions in the arts in Hong Kong.
Thank you. Richard.
Can I just come back to this question of failure? Because I think it's quite important. I mean, there are various ways of looking at failure, aren't there? I mean, if you're a public funding body, as the Arts Council is, failure could be that the people and the institutions you invest in don't make money, are not sustainable, and fall over. And that's sad for a public institution funding the arts, because it shows that you've invested and it hasn't worked out in a profitable way. But if you take that as your only criterion, what are you going to do about the artist who, in a group or solely, produces work and actually doesn't really worry about financial remuneration? So if you use financial remuneration and sustainability in a structural sense as a measure of failure, you are setting yourself up for a very difficult choice about what you do about sustaining artistic creativity, which is, in my view, probably not about success or failure at all. It's about creativity.
Okay, Simone.
First of all, thank you for the discussion. I would suggest that this question of success and failure is it's a constant question. I will just give an example. Last year, this year, Canada is celebrating its 150th anniversary, and our Ministry of Culture organized big celebrations, and us at Canada Council, we kind of decided that we would put $35 million to have artistic projects that would be legacy projects, but we never mentioned the idea of celebrating. Because for a lot of Canadians, including the Indigenous people and the French-speaking people, there was nothing to celebrate. So we really used the idea marking the anniversary. So we made a big call for proposal. We had 2,100 artistic projects that have been presented, and we kept 200. So a very low rate of success. And those projects were funded at a very high level, $500,000 each. So it was big. So I read a lot of those proposals because I don't make the decision myself, you know, it's made by jury. And I read some proposals and I saw many of those shows. Some are coming yet because it's what calls 2017 and beyond. And some of those shows were not as good as the proposal was. But for me, a failure is when it's boring. Failure, it's not when, you know, it's not completely achieved, mastered, and all of that, or, you know, it's not well attended. Failure for me is when you decide as an arts council to invest in artistic creation, and what you see is boring, repetitive, predictable, average. So I think this question of success and failure, certainly artistic success is not something easily measurable, but guess what? Every time you take like 60 people who know more or less about the arts, they will come rapidly to the conclusion that it's interesting or not interesting. And if it's not interesting, for me, it's kind of a failure. And, you know, that's okay. We took risk. That's really okay. So it's not about being nice or being positive. For me, art has no responsibility to be beautiful. I mean, Macbeth, it's not a nice story, you know. There's nothing nice there, you know. So I think it's, but I think one of the biggest problem we have now is what a lot of people call grant-entrepreneurship. So people who develop an idea of how to master, how to get a grant in a way that is very high, and some organizations are very good at it. But it's not because you master the language and you can convince a jury that your project is good, that it will be an artistic success and that it will last. Most of the time, when you are so perfect in your proposal, the show you will present will be a little bit boring, and for me, that's failure. So that's my personal view about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosa.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to attempt bringing the two ideas together. I mean, the question that Rupert asked about what should funders like us do, and this idea of failure. Interestingly, perhaps it is that for those of us who are funders, it is actually to address, as I think I might have mentioned it yesterday, I mean, in Singapore, we try to do that better, and that is to basically understand where there's market failure. Right? Because as state bodies, you know, with state monies, you really don't want to go into something which the market is already functioning quite well. And interestingly, there are different phases, right? And this is never something which is static. You need to have a good sense of where it looks like it's taking off, and you need to know how to get out of that. And these are difficult conversations, but you need to go to the next area. So what that tells us is some of us who are funders had better get our data points right, had better have a good sensing of what's lying ahead. And it's got to do with understanding the changes in the operating environment, which is now increasingly fast, and you need to kind of know that this is where you can help the arts move ahead. Because if you didn't look ahead, and many arts groups don't do that, the arts community cannot afford to do that. If you didn't talk to people and sort of benchmark where the best people were going at all the different areas that the arts needs, then as a funder, you're not able to then get your resources out and put your limited resources to the right places, you see. So that, I mean, I just thought I would share Singapore's great challenges. We're so small, and maybe more than others, you know, little countries cannot afford to make big mistakes. So we're trying very hard to understand what's going on around us and to try and, you know, put things forward if we think there's market failure. Yeah.
Anyone? Okay. Lynn, and then...
on the subject of failure, I'd like to make a point about the flip side, which is success. Everybody wants every arts group to be successful, the companies themselves and the funders. But there is also a danger on pinning too much on a success and wanting it to be totally sustainable. All too often we've been asked, oh, this is a really great project, but we really cannot fund you anymore. It's so successful. You have to be sustainable on your own. I think there are two levels of danger here. First of all, if something is very successful, why should a company become the victim of its own success? This does not make sense. If you want to create great masters from our young people, you've got to sustain that company. And therefore, it is up to funders to be extremely bold, to be able to say, right, I'm going to bet on this horse. Is the Jockey Club here? Oh, sorry. I'm going to bet on this horse, and I'm going to put money there so that you will have funding for the next 10 years to grow. Not 3 years, not 5 years, but 10 years. So I think this is really what we should be gunning for before we even start to look at growing masters, which I totally agree with. Secondly, can we please define the word sustainable? We're not in the environmental situation. I do understand that. But when something is sustained because it has clocked a box office of 3,000 people, it doesn't necessarily mean it's successful. It means that it's got the number of bums on seats, it's got the spectacle and the fireworks. It can mean that. So I think putting a spanner in the works, I'd really like to invite funders to have serious dialogues with artists, because I do think we're still worlds apart in some way. And this is the way we can move the arts forward. It's not about high art or low art. It's about how do we bring the human values together with the funding issues. And there's never, never an easy answer. But I think we have to start this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Socha?
So to represent the view from the Celtic fringe and another, well, two small nations, Scotland and Ireland, where I was born. In this conversation around failure, I've been reflecting a lot on a quote that I came across from the very well-known Irish playwright Samuel Beckett, and is something that has always sort of followed me through my professional life, and that is try again, fail better. So even in failure, there are benchmarks for success, I think, and I think we could all learn from that. And one of the things that has really struck me from this incredibly stimulating 2 days, spending time with experts from around the world, is the importance of language. I have learned so much hearing colleagues from different environments and different contexts speaking about similar issues, but actually using very specific languages that come from those contexts. And it occurs to me, sort of returning to Simon's point about grantepreneurship, and some of the conversations that we had yesterday about, sort of a shift in debate from sort of the arts as drivers for economic development and driving tourism to a sense of needing to engage with audiences and communities, that too often we are, I suppose because we are all chasing the money, there's been a lot of talk of chasing the money and where the money should go, too often we are led, rather than, yes, the arts are led, by needing to speak those languages and by finding ways to reflect what we do in the languages of other agendas. And there is a great value in translation, that translation is absolutely critical, but translation is not, the art of translation is actually about truly understanding the authentic language of the original, and then finding a way of expressing that to a wider audience, to wider communities, and to different speakers of different languages. And I think we need to focus more on that, on finding our true, authentic language, and then finding ways to translate that retain that authenticity.
Thank you. Well, can I suggest that each of the panel speakers on stage have 1 minute to say your last few words? Shu-wing? Not your last words.
About failure, we're good. Maybe the funding body can consider making a category of funding weakness rather than funding strength. Because we write proposal, the first line is, I am very good at this, and then I want to achieve this. No, sometimes it's bullshit, we know that. So ask them to write what you are weak at, and then tell me how you can improve your weakness. That could be another way around.
Connie?
I'm thinking about funders. So there should be more funders because next time we should have more potential funders coming to this conference because I think funders should have their own agenda and focus. So, but if we
They are afraid to come, you know.
No, you have the charm. You just attract them, and then I think it's really important is because what we're doing, arts is for daily life. It's not for people just like art, and I think that is very important. And I think no one will argue that art is also making we have a better life. No, it's not a solution, but we really can enjoy life. So, Wilfred, next time we rely on you. Ask more funders, potential funders to come to join this conference, okay?
Okay, Doryun.
Still mulling over what Rupert was asking, that what could funders afford not to support or stand for, but also in relation to what Simone just said about when it's just boring and not interesting, then that's failure. And in fact, there's a lot of that. So I wonder, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, you know, maybe the world actually has too many artists, too many organizations, too many art events, and I think we are also kind of blind to the whole capitalist logic of constant growth and accumulation and expansion. So in order to fail better next time, you don't perhaps have to fail so many times in between.
Tim.
I wanted to thank Lynn for putting a few words on the agenda in the last couple of days. I think wanting to have a definition of sustainability is a good one because it's a word that is just bounced around sort of somewhat meaninglessly. What do we really mean by sustainable? I mean, obviously there is a kind of business sustainability, but surely there's the sustainability of an organisation to remain stimulating and vibrant and dynamic. That is an essential part of sustainability. The other great thing that Lynn said yesterday which I loved, was that insistence on mindful presence and demanding that all the participants in her programs are, number one, mindfully present. And we didn't really touch on this, but in the discussion of technology and the role that technology plays in the arts, it can often reduce things down to something so trivial and so meaningless that we don't focus on it. And that, I think, one thing that will always be a vitally important quality in the performing arts in particular is that shared experience of several hundred people in a room silently contemplating something that's going on with everybody mindfully present, and that's something that you can't have delivered by technology to you individually because it's about a shared experience, and I think that's something that we all cherish.
Right, thank you. The last 2 days really has brought a lot of meaning to this type of international conference. Because even for us local people, we don't get a chance to have dialogues like this too often. Hong Kong is so busy that I hardly have time to see my wife, not to, she's there. That's why she comes. And it's so difficult for us to really engage meaningfully in very serious discussions like this. And the presence of our overseas visitors becomes a facilitator. You have stimulated a lot of the thinking behind us. And I think, this 2 days have managed to change the way I look at things. Should we just encourage strength and not weakness? Should we take away grants when you become successful? I mean, these are all things that funders have assumed that it should be the case. And for me, I need to learn to be more courageous to stand in front of the politicians. Because a lot of the time, the funding system was coined because the politicians wanted to do certain things. They wanted to show the results. They wanted to, have more audience and etc. We, as the ADC, we as the conglomerate of of practitioners and administrators should have the courage to stand in front of the politicians and say, that's not the way things should be done. And I'd like to leave, because everyone takes different messages home because of our own history. I'd like to cite Confucius saying, balance. Everything has to be balanced. And that was the message I took home. Thank you.